Well, I was in Swansea last Wednesday, so if it's Wednesday, it must be Wales. So back here in Wales, it's great to be back. I'm based in London, but my accent gives me away. I'm not from these parts. Anyone like to guess where I'm from? You get two guesses, and one of them is going to be wrong. Over there? You're very lucky you said New Zealand, because Australians don't get upset by that, and that's all I'll say. So, as Sarah said, I'm from IBM, and I've spent 12 years in startups, and only 8 weeks ago I joined Big Blue. So I suppose I have a similar story to David in that he spent a lot of time being an entrepreneur, but now I've gone sort of corporate side, and many of my friends have said why, and hopefully after tonight you'll understand why. So I want to talk about the lessons I've learned from my last 12 years in startups. And in fact, one of those startups I'll mention is the reason I moved my whole family 7 years ago from Sydney to London. Anyone remember this computer? Anyone had one of these? Sinclair ZX80 was my first computer back in 1980. I cut my teeth on that. And gosh, that was great. I think it had 4K of RAM, it had the TV connection out there, and you had to push very hard to make everything work. So I've been playing with this stuff for a while. Of course, I then upgraded the Commodore 64, the original blue screen of death. When you saw that, you knew that maybe it would work. And then spent some time, my first time online was with bulletin boards. And so I can honestly say I've been online for 30 years. And if you remember the sort of green bulletin boards back then, you would dial up and you would leave a message and you then dial in later on to see if anyone had emailed you. Well, I was on the internet, what we call online, so much then my father made me get a second phone line because I was always on the phone line, the 300 bits per second dial up. Andrew, get off the phone. Well, why don't you get a second phone line, Dad, and then maybe I'll be able to play with this stuff. That was my first website in 1999. There's a great website called archive.org. Archive.org that allows you to go back in time, and I went back to see that. If this was live, you'd see the flashing graphics and the animated GIFs there. It was really a website of the 90s. My first blog in 2004, actually I was talking about LinkedIn. And back then I had 120 friends on LinkedIn. But the reason I joined LinkedIn way back then was my boss at the time emailed me saying, you should join this. I thought, is this a pyramid scheme? Am I going to get scammed by this? And LinkedIn then and now allows you to upload your contact directory to see who else is there. And 32 people that I thought should be on LinkedIn were, and that made me join. So that was kind of my start there. But what I'll talk about a bit later on in the talk is how you can use social media to promote your business and actually appear larger than you might actually be. Twitter also allows you to go back in time to look at your first tweets, and I had some great ones there at Starbucks in London. Very, very prolific there as well. Hopefully my tweets, if you look at Andrew Grill, are slightly more interesting than back in 2008. One of the questions that was asked of the panel last week in Swansea was, how did you get started? What were the tips that really got you where you are? And all of us, I think, to a T, said that we had a great mentor. Now, my first mentor was and is my father. He actually, back in 1982, entered an entrepreneurial workshop. It was a regional thing in Australia. He and the team then won the national one. And they all had special T-shirts printed. Guess what it said? Entrepreneurs do it for profit. Now, this is actually a shot from a week ago. I emailed my father saying, have you still got that T-shirt from 1982? Yes, I have. And here it is. So that was the slogan back then, and it probably is very true today as well. So I'm very lucky that I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My father ran a small business. I sat at the kitchen table, shared the highs and the lows, worked out how to hire and fire people, worked out how to write a job application. And unlike David, I love networking. I love meeting new people, and I think I have my father to thank for that he was always meeting new people and saying if you introduce yourself to these people, they might just be able to help you one day. So I thought I'd explain my sort of 12-year journey. Back in Australia, I worked for some very large companies, so it's not the first time I've worked for large companies, Telstra and Optus, two big telcos. I then started my 12-year journey working for a company you would never have heard of some of these, called Property Look. I was very lucky at the time that the president of my local Rotary Club, a guy called Bill Chillingworth, he actually was the president of CB Richard Ellis in Australia. And he came to me one lunchtime and he said, Andrew, we're starting up this online thing. We're going to get ourselves and our 3 other competitors and put all of our commercial property stock on one website called Property Look. Would you be interested in running it? Now, I knew nothing about commercial property. I knew nothing really about running a website. I'd never been a CEO. But I thought, I've got to break outside of my comfort zone. I'm in Telstra, large telco. How do I break out of that and get this new experience? So they appointed me CEO, and I started my journey on Property Look. We became very successful. I then moved into mobile. I worked for some mobile messaging companies. Seeker Wireless was the company that actually got us to London. I was selling into Vodafone from Sydney so often on a plane between London and Sydney. They said, why don't you move there and set up the office? So that's why I'm here. And then Gigaphone was a Russian mobile advertising company, and that's a whole separate discussion of sidearms and fast cars in Moscow. More recently, I moved into social, and so I work for a company called Visible Technologies. They compete with companies like Radian6 and Brandwatch. They look at everything that's happening on Twitter and Facebook and try and make sense of it. And more recently, 2 months ago, I was with a company called Cred. Cred competes with Klout. They look at online influence. And the thing that they have was access to the Twitter firehose. And so they had, and still have, 250 billion tweets that you can actually go through and look at that. So that was very interesting. So Cred, not to be confused with Klout. And that was a very interesting time as well. Whenever I talk about social media, either internally or externally in IBM, I always show this slide. Because being an Australian, I like to dumb things down a bit. And I think social media is like real life. When the PA wasn't working, you're all chatting away. Some people knew people at the table, some didn't. And afterwards, we'll have some nibbles and some drinks. And I want you to try this. Go up to two people that are talking to each other, because they know each other or have just met, and try and break into that conversation and see how long it takes. Now, if you've got something of value to say, because you've overheard something you can add value, you'll get into that conversation straight away. If you go up to them and say, I've got a new startup idea and you should give me £750,000, they'll say, the door's over there. The latter is an ad. And so I think whether you're a startup or a large corporate, the challenge is, how do you become relevant? And so how are you invited into that conversation? And I spend most of my career now going and counselling people saying, you can't treat social as just another channel. It is a conversation. You actually have to have something of value there. So try that wherever you are and see how long it takes to get invited into the conversation. The one thing I'm quoted on the most, and some of you will tweet this tonight, is that I think social media is the best piece of market research you never commissioned. Now, it's free, it's rude, it's raw, and it's unstructured, but here are people talking about your company. And I spend my time in IBM talking to banks and to drink companies and you name it, and they're all saying, well, how do we harvest this? How do we work out what people think of us? And when you've found out what they think of you or your competitors, you can start doing something with it. And never before have we been able to do almost instant market research. Now, I speak a lot at conferences, and people tweet about what I said. So for me as a speaker, I can come off stage and know how I've done almost instantly. Either there'll be no tweets at all, because no one understood what I said, or there'll be things. In fact, once I was in Holland, and my Dutch is not very good, so I used Google Translate, and people kept talking about open doors. I thought, this is very strange. And apparently in Holland, if you say, oh, it's all open door, it means you're kicking an open door and it's just basic. I'd misread the audience. I thought it was a basic introductory lecture and they were all quite experienced. So I knew straight away that I hadn't met the mark. So even as a speaker, you can actually use social media to know how you're doing with your product. Now, a couple of heroes of mine. One is Angela Ahrendts from Burberry. She's about to become head of retail at Apple. They've poached her. But she's a very smart lady. She says that consumer data will be the biggest differentiator in the next 2 to 3 years. Whoever unlocks the reams of data and uses it will strategically win. And she is a very, very successful retailer. She knows that this new world is here and that data is out there, and if you're able to harness it, you'll know more about your competitor. And how has Burberry done? Last results, they were 18% up. Basically, they said footfall was soft online but grew strongly online. They've worked out as a retailer who have big stores and big inventory to actually use digital. Now, why I think Angela is really smart is that she said basically, I do not have all the answers. But most of my customers and most of my staff are kind of around 30 years of age. So why don't we ask them? So she set up an internal digital council of the 30-somethings and had an executive council to execute on that vision. And so one of the reasons they've been successful in digital is they've actually been able to harness what's coming next. And so as entrepreneurs, how can we harness what's being set out there and actually use it for effect? So in 12 years, I've learned a few things, as David has as well. So I thought I'd share them with you about what to do and what not to do. The first thing I learned is that the founder tenure is key. One of the startups I worked for had the CEO in for 8 years. Very smart man, knew his stuff, but was making mistakes for the first time. Mistakes I'd made over and over again in my career and learnt from. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to listen to us saying, that's not going to work. So I've seen startup after startup fail because the founder is in there and it's hard to remove him or her, and they're really passionate, but they've outlived their usefulness, and you need to get a grown-up CEO in there. And so my experience has been, if you leave that person there too long, you're not going to be able to get them out. In fact, what happened during the time, we actually interviewed for CEOs, we had actually appointed someone, he then decided to go overseas, and we lost that, and it was like, oh, it's all too hard. And guess what happened to the company? It's failed. So the founder being in for too long, for me, was an issue. Bootstrapping. We're having a discussion at the table before about when you get this funding, you know that the recipients of that funding are going to blow it against a wall. For example, my competition, one of the companies I ran, every day free lunches for the staff of 70 and really expensive cars in the driveway. That says to me, and if I was a VC, that we may have actually given them too much money because they're a bit dangerous now and they want to give it all away. When I was in some of these startups, it was real bootstrapping. And yes, it was flying economy, which I still do, by the way, even at IBM. But it's using what money you have for as long as possible. Because when you go for that next round of funding, and they can see you've been really, really economic with the funding to date, and actually, you know, done everything on a shoestring and bootstrapped everything for as long as you can, they're more likely to trust you with their money. So most of the startups I've been in, we've bootstrapped for as long as we possibly can. And when it came to funding and revenue, we were in a good position. Find a mentor. You know, my father was my first mentor. David has his mentors. Mentors actually like having mentees. It's very flattering for someone to go and say, would you please be my mentor? Well, of course I would. In my 8 weeks at IBM, I picked up 3 mentees. They've sought me out and said, well, I'd really like you to be my mentor. I'd be delighted to. I'd love to share what I've learned, and I'm learning from them as well. So in any organisation, big or small, you really need a mentor who will help you and decide if you're doing the right thing. And David mentioned it before, fail fast and ship often. Where in my 12 years I saw people coming unstuck was they wanted to gold plate everything, and most of the companies I've been in have been tech startups. So the engineer said, no, we can't release it yet because it's got to have the next, no, I want to sell it. I have a customer who wants to pay us money. You can't over-engineer this. Facebook, every day update their website. If you live in New Zealand, you get the new version of Facebook every day. They ship every single day. You wouldn't notice it, but they have a rigorous release cycle that every day things get changed. So if Facebook can do it with 1 billion users, you can do it as well. So I want to finish off with some tips from my own world of how to use social media to get ahead. Because 12 years ago, most of us remember this thing called the internet. I certainly do. And back then, if you were a small company, you could appear a lot larger than your competitors because you could go a lot faster and actually have a presence. And back then, people were saying, do we need a website? Do we need a web strategy? We know how it all ends. Now I'm asked, do we need to be on social? Do we need a social media strategy? Well, you need to be there. I was at a conference yesterday and someone said, well, how many people do you need to listen in your call centre? And the response was, well, they're talking about you already. And I said, it depends how bad your product is. If it's really bad, you need lots of people to counter what I call the Twitter tax. If you go on social media and say, hey, we're on Twitter, tweet us if you've got a problem, guess what? People will. And the 30 years of broken processes that you've got, people will actually come out. I had one customer who, before they launched, said, you know what, we're going to have a few tweets about our delivery because it's pretty shocking. And, okay, let's launch. They launched. Guess what the tweet's about? The delivery was shocking. So I said, why don't you learn from that? You're actually now getting verbatim. You're getting exactly where the problems are, and you can actually feed that back. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, there's one tweet that I sent on the 15th of January 2011 that I can trace back to why I'm standing here tonight. This is the actual tweet. I found it on my archive, and I've screenshot. I did a blog post this week that's been really popular because people are saying, how can one tweet get you to IBM and get you to speak in front of some Welsh entrepreneurs? So whenever I'm traveling, I actually tweet where I am. I'm quite open about what I'm doing because you never know who you're going to meet. So this particular tweet was sent when I landed in San Francisco. I was there for the weekend. I'd been up for a sales conference. And lo and behold, another Aussie tweeted back, a guy called Anthony McGregor-Day, who I'd never met. In fact, we nearly met in Sydney one day, but he was living in San Francisco, and he said, hey, why don't we catch up for dinner? We ended up catching up for lunch that day. He introduced me to the founder of Cred. He employed me. I was with Cred for 2 years. IBM became interested. Because I'm at IBM, Welsh Government said, why don't you come and talk to these entrepreneurs? So I can actually trace back to that one tweet why I'm here tonight. So whenever I speak to a group of people, be it internal in my own company or external like this, ask for a show of hand, who is not on Twitter? Okay, one. You will be by tonight, because the ROI of that tweet is fairly high. And there are two reasons why you should be on Twitter. Now, you may say, oh, I've got nothing to talk about. That's okay. You need to be on there for two reasons. One is brand protection. I was lucky in 2006 or 2007, I got @AndrewGrill. That's my name. Unless you're John Smith, you've got a pretty good chance of getting something resembling your name. Second thing is, it's this market research channel. Follow people that are interested in what you're doing, entrepreneurship, whales. You then have this research stream of information. Now, I have a bunch of followers. I cannot possibly hope to look at them all, but I dip in and out, and they give me the best insights. So this has become a really good research tool for me as well in doing my job. I think to be social, you've got to get social, you've got to be social, and that's a mantra that I live by. So that's why I'm on these networks. And there are things that you can do. So this is a great thing that LinkedIn has called Who's Viewed My Profile. Everyone know about this? If you actually go to LinkedIn, it's under the profile button. If you hover over that, it then says Who's Viewed My Profile. This is my one joy every day, or one of a number of joys every day, to see who's viewed my profile. It's like reverse stalking. Who's been looking at me? And when I did this screenshot, it was about a week into IBM. That's one of the senior execs there at Tina. Sophie was someone I was dealing with. It's like, why are they looking at me? That's interesting. Now, I'll tell you how this becomes interesting for two reasons. I call it the E-tap. The E-tap on the shoulder. So if I want to go and do business with someone, I'll first of all see if they're on Twitter and they're on LinkedIn, and I'll follow them and I'll ask to connect with them, or at least look at their page. And they will then see that someone has actually looked at the profile. Now, you can set this to see how you appear. So at the moment, if I look at your LinkedIn profile, say it's Andrew Grill, partner at IBM. Or it could just be a partner at IBM, or it could just be someone. And you look here, I'd rather deal with Adam or Tina than LinkedIn member. In reverse, if someone is wanting to sell into me or connect with me, and the day before they followed me on Twitter, and they looked at my LinkedIn profile, I am open to a meeting or a conversation because they're doing their homework. And let me tell you, with 28,000 tweets over the last 7 years, there's a bit of homework you can do on me. So I actually look to see whether they have their Twitter profile there. You can also put your websites there. You can become really attractive to people because you want them to know what you're about, what your product's about, what your service is about, why you need funding. And LinkedIn allow you to actually add videos and brochures and pictures. And I know David's done this. I had a look at your website. You've done the same thing. So tonight I'm filming this event. It's my little camera up there, the smaller of the two cameras. I didn't bring the big kit. That will then become a video at about midnight tonight on my website, and it may make it onto LinkedIn. So when you're looking through my LinkedIn profile, there's even me back in 2000 with more hair and a webcast I did with Telstra. This shows you that there's a body of work that I'm very proud of. And so when companies like IBM want to employ someone like me, I know that they go through and they do their homework. So if you're an entrepreneur and want people to fund you or be concerned about your project or product, make yourself really visible. This is so easy to do, and I'm sure you've got photographs and brochures and things for the different roles you've had. And Google can be your friend. If you Google me, which I do from time to time, the first 9 are me, and I can never quite get rid of Andrew's Bar and Grill in Tallahassee. They just won't go away. But I've got my own blog, I've got Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+. They're doing the work for you. Because you're on these other networks, Google then goes and crawls it all, and so my Andrew Grill name, I can actually start owning that brand, because I am a brand. One day I won't be working for IBM, and I'll be doing something else. Probably in a very long time if you're watching the video. But you want to actually have a personal brand, and it's more important if you're in a small business as well, because you are the brand. And they will want to see what you've done in your history to whether they should invest with you, so that's very important. And Google+, how many here are on Google+? I bet you only have, quite a few. Now, if you have a web property or a blog, did you know you can get your mugshot on Google searches as well? It's really simple. On Google+, you make sure you list the website that is yours and you own. And on that website, you have a small bit of code or a WordPress plugin that actually says to Google, this is my website. So on my blog, I've got the code linking back to Google+. And on Google+, it links to my blog. There's a marriage there, and it says, right, this really is your content. So I'm more likely to look at this post because my little mugshot's there as well. So little things like that make you more attractive to people because they see that they know you know what you're doing. This is my old company, Cred, and what Cred can do also, if you're on social media, is it's almost like a window on you or your competitors. So you can put any app name in here, and this is a look at my Cred page. It shows what sort of content people are interested in, my follower count, my Cred score, and this actually gives you almost like an audit of how you're doing on social. But you can also do it for your competitors to see what they're doing and what content is resonating from their followers and things like that. And the one final advice I'll give you is a free website called About.me. Anyone heard of About.me? Completely free, a few people. For those of you that are saying, look, I don't want to do a blog and Twitter, it's all too hard. The one thing you can invest some time in, it probably takes 10 minutes, is go to About.com, get your free, About.me, beg your pardon, About.me. It's a free service. You can put some content there. You can put your different social profiles. So what some people do is actually from their Twitter page, the one link they have is to their About.me page to actually then show off what they're doing. So I've got video there and a nice shot of me doing some presentation. And that can be your calling card for people that are interested in finding you. So that's me at Andrew Grill. Occasionally I say interesting things on Twitter. Love to speak with you later on, and thanks for your attention.